In a galaxy ruled by a consortium that manipulates the tides of space to dictate destinies, an unstoppable human, Kyle, accepts his greatest challenge: to protect an exiled mother and her child, expose the truth, and discover that real power isn't about winning battles, but about choosing to stay. Heliopolis Ring looked like a jewel suspended over a world of endless water. From up here, Aquilon breathed in dark blue waves, breaking against cyclopean pillars that held the city the way one holds a dream by its strings. The air tasted of salt, ozone and spices, and the floor vibrated in sync with the lift turbines, as if the floating metropolis had a heartbeat. Kale Rook leaned against the translucent railing and watched the elegant chaos of the ring market: shimmering membrane stalls, calligraphic drones writing prices in the air, luminescent fish swimming inside water tubes that cut through streets like vertical rivers. Slung over his shoulder, a scavenger's pack jingled with promises of rare parts. In his eyes burned the look of someone who's seen too much, and for that very reason searches for something more. 3 minutes, he murmured to himself, a crooked smile tugging at his mouth. Let's try not to get bored for 3 minutes. He wasn't talking about patience. He was talking about oaths. Moving his fingers like a distracted magician, Kale traced a thin, almost invisible seal in the air. The seal latched onto his forearm, lit up, and a minimalist HUD bloomed at the edge of his vision. Oath active. Parameter blank. A scream sliced through the crowd like a blade. A woman with nacreous skin, veined with subtle bioluminescence, burst between the stalls. Dragging by the hand, a boy with enormous eyes so pale they looked full of stars. 3 of the consortium's enforcers, crystal armor laced with copper veins, came right behind, shoving their way through. "Stop!" barked the one in front. The helmet's amp system made his voice echo hollow. "Ceres Arlum, in the name of the Oracle, you are under arrest." "The child as well?" The woman halted, turned with the poise of years at court, and raised a sphere, a map orb, pulsing a deep ocean blue. She set her jaw. "I am Ceres, regent of Aquilon, and I will not return to a cell." The boy narrowed his eyes, sensing colors no one else could see. Kale sighed. A tiny smile, almost relief, crept onto his face. 3 minutes then. He typed the parameter into the HUD in quick strokes, feet rooted to the ground. A beep. 180 began counting down. Little currents of possibility shimmered under the floor, as if reality snapped its fingers to warm up. "Hey, Crystal Wardrobe!" Kale called, raising his hand. "Your tag's crooked." The enforcers turned. The leader sized up the human head to toe. Worn travel coat, salt-stained boots, humor begging for a punch. He leveled his electric spear. "Step aside, citizen. This is not your concern." "It is now." Kyle pointed to his boots. "Oath, for 180 seconds my feet won't leave the ground. Want to try anyway?" Ceres frowned, puzzled. The boy looked at Kyle like spotting a comet. The leader moved forward, and then the world caught its breath. It was subtle. The magnetized floor dragged micro-shards of ferrite. The instant the spear came down, the strap on the second enforcer's sheath snagged the first one's buckle. A canopy dumped its stored water at the wrong time. Kale braided all of it together with the smallest gesture, a finger barely moving, and with his feet glued to the floor, his body became lever, catapult, whirlwind. An arm redirected the spear, an elbow shoved Crystal at the perfect angle, his shoulder pivoted like a hinge greased by chance. 173. One enforcer arced through the air, slamming into a drone line. 161. Another slipped in the canopy water and dove headfirst into a river tube, which swallowed him indignantly. 149. The leader locked his spear. Kyle touched the shaft with 2 fingers and pulled a possibility. The internal micro-oscillator fails now. The blade died with a sad little beep. The crowd held its breath between nervous laughter and awe. Ceres stepped forward, regal yet startled. The boy smiled. "You see colors too," he whispered to Kyle. "I see threads." Kyle winked. "Want to pull one?" Elan nodded with the solemnity children reserve for very important things. Kyle extended his index finger. The boy touched it with his pinky. A tiny crackle, and the possibilities sang. The leader's spear, now dead, turned into a rod for fishing disaster. 112. "Enough," Ceres murmured. Not to Kyle, but to fear itself. "Let's go." "Let's," Kyle agreed without lifting his feet. "But run when I say jellyfish." The leader roared. Kyle pulled a tide of bad luck beneath the man's boots. "Jellyfish," he said, and Ceres understood. Mother and son darted between crates, and Kyle, spinning on his own axis, feet firm always, scrambled the geometry of that alley of stalls once and for all. 65. The 3 enforcers lay on the ground. The crowd applauded like they'd just seen an expensive trick. The HUD chimed, "Oath complete." Kale finally lifted his heels from the floor and felt a sweet shiver up the back of his neck, the first sip of fresh water after a desert of boredom. "I should arrest you for this, human," rasped the metallic voice from the floor. "You should," Kyle agreed, offering his hand to Ceres, who hesitated. "But today's a lucky day. Yours isn't." Ceres gripped his hand with the strength of someone holding on to the future. "I'll pay," she said quickly. "Not with credits, with truth. Take us to the Tide Archive, and I'll give you a key that can topple the Oracle." Kyle tilted his head, eyeing the orb pulsing like the heart of the ocean. "Truth is the most expensive currency," he smiled sideways. "New oath, protect you using only 10% of what I can, just to keep it fun." "Are you insane?" Ceres asked without irony. "Frequently." Kale gestured down the path. "And apparently useful. Come before the city starts charging admission." The rain of Heliopolis ring thickened, and off they went. An exiled regent, a boy who saw colors, and a human who swore against his own power, running along glass walkways toward an archive that held the secrets of tides and empires. The lower docks of the ring city boiled with steam and rust. It was a maze of narrow corridors and platforms suspended above magnetic tides. There, Ceres, deposed former regent, and her son Ilan tried to reach a smuggler's ship. But before they could board, consortium enforcers appeared among the columns, their black armor reflecting blue light. The boy gripped his mother's hand, eyes wide. "They found us, Mother." Ceres kept her voice steady despite her racing heart. "Stay behind me, Ilan." She raised the orb, trying to activate a shield, but the consortium's frequencies blocked it. One of the enforcers raised a loud hailer. "Deposed Regent Ceres. Hand over the orb and the air. Your escape is over." Ceres lifted her chin, blue against blue. "Never." The corridor reverberated with slow footsteps. Between vapor and neon, Kyle emerged, hands in his pockets, eyes lazy. He looked like just another drifter, worn clothes, tousled hair, but his calm clashed with the setting. "You're blocking the lunch line," he said in a drawl. "Mind moving aside?" The enforcers turned, surprised at the audacity. "Human, step away." Kyle yawned. "Ah, I love when they say that." He opened an invisible HUD with a tap of his foot. Letters projected in the air. Oath number 1. 3 seconds, feet stuck to the floor. A beep. Oath active. Ceres stared, incredulous. "Who are you?" Kyle smiled, eyes glinting. "Someone who likes short challenges." The enforcers advanced, weapons raised. Kyle inhaled deeply, feet fixed to the floor, and murmured a mental countdown. 3, 2, 1. What followed looked like an impossible choreography. Without moving his feet, his torso spun like a coiled spring, elbows, shoulders and knees firing micro-strikes synchronized with the currents of air. Each blow hit an exact point, disarming enforcers, dropping them like dominoes. Lights flickered, weapons clattered to the floor. The last enforcer tried to shoot. Kyle tilted only his hips, dodging the beam, and with a tap of his heel, triggered a magnetic wave that shoved him back. Exactly 3 seconds later, all of them were on the ground, groaning or unconscious. Kyle raised his hands in a theatrical gesture. And done. Didn't even sweat. Elan peeked from behind his mother, mouth open. "You're a hero." Kyle winked. "No, I just like to play with statistics." Ceres still held the orb aloft, trying to make sense of him. "Why did you help?" Kyle shrugged. "You looked like you needed a show, and I was bored." He leaned down, still with feet glued to the floor, and nudged one of the unconscious enforcers. "But if you want to pay me, I take secrets. I like secrets." Ceres realized this was her chance. "I have secrets," she said firmly. "Enough data to bring down the consortium, but I need to reach the Tide archive." Kale arched an eyebrow. "Now you're speaking my language." He released the HUD. Oath complete, and finally stepped forward. "Okay, Blue, tell me more." Ceres hugged the orb to her chest, relieved. Elan stared at Kyle as if he'd seen a living myth, and so, in that corridor of steam and fallen foes, began the unlikely alliance that would turn the tide against the consortium. Magnetic rain streamed along the suspended corridors of Heliopolis Ring like liquid neon threads, scattering green reflections over white metal. The salty tang mixed with ozone marked every breath. Ceres, still breathless from the run, clutched Elan to her chest. The boy trembled more with excitement than fear, his luminescent eyes flickering as he read the strands of probability dancing in the air around Kyle. Kyle stopped beneath a translucent arch to catch his breath, or to pretend to. The HUD in his vision showed the oath completed, but he kept his fingers curled as if holding an invisible line. Ceres, hair plastered to her temples by the wet, lifted the map orb. Its blue light pulsed, projecting symbols of tides and lost routes. "I don't have enough credits to pay you for what you just did," she said, her voice steady despite her exhaustion. "But I have this, ancient data, sealed routes, a secret that can topple the Oracle. If you take us to the Tide archive, I'll give you the key." Kyle raised an eyebrow, watching the projection float, gravitational current symbols, hidden coordinates, pulses of submarine energy. He let out a low whistle. "Don't offer me your body," he said without looking up, almost distracted. "And don't offer me a throne. I refuse those outright. Data I'll take, but only if it's fun." Ceres tilted her head, puzzled. Elan looked up at Kyle with curious sparkle. "Fun?" the boy echoed. Kyle winked at him. "Yeah, kid. Fun. If I accept this, it's with an oath. I'll use only 10% of what I can, just to see if I survive the hard way." Ceres stared at him, trying to decipher. "Why? You can get us there whole or not." Kale's sideways smile returned as he leaned a shoulder against the wall, water running through his brown hair. "Because the problem isn't power, it's boredom. I haven't lived this long just to die of boredom." Ceres shut her eyes briefly, maybe calculating the odds. Then she nodded. "If that means we reach the archive, I accept. But don't toy with my son." Kyle inclined his head, serious for the first time since the encounter. "I play with the universe, not with children." He turned to Elan. "Want to learn a trick, kid?" The boy's eyes widened, but he nodded slowly. Kyle extended his index finger. Elan touched it with his pinky. The HUD flashed, oath initiated. A thin thread of light crossed between them. Ceres held the orb closer to her chest, shoulders tense. Then it settled. Take us to the archive. Kyle flicked his hand, opening a mental map of Heliopolis Ring, escape lines, hidden docks, maintenance shafts. The consortium would already be tracking their signature. It was only a matter of time before the next wave of enforcers arrived. And this time, they'd be ready. "It's gonna be tight," he murmured. "But I can do it. I just need to find a fun way off this ring before it turns into a trap." Ceres pressed her lips, thinking. The next magnetic tide rises in 10 minutes. We could use the drainage channels to reach the lower docks. Kyle smiled with approval. "I like people who already think in maps." He tapped the orb. "Show me the exit and I'll improvise the rest." Ilan tugged at his mother's sleeve. "Mom, they're already here." His voice was a whisper. "I see the colors. A lot of red. Coming fast." Kyle narrowed his eyes, also feeling the pulse of probabilities bending through space. The consortium had unleashed the hunter drones. "Then we're gonna have to surf the tide," he said with a crooked grin. "New challenge, escape through the drainage channel with inverted gravity." He looked at Ceres. "You in?" She drew a steady breath. "We have no choice." Kyle snapped his fingers, activating the HUD for the next oath. The characters danced in the air. No touching metal surfaces. "Wait," Ceres began, but didn't have time to finish. Sirens echoed down the corridor. The ring's vibrations shifted frequency. Through the gaps in the walkway, columns of water began to rise upward, heralding the magnetic tide. Kyle smiled at the boy. "Ready for a crazy ride, Ilan?" The boy bared a grin full of sharp teeth. "Always." Ceres pulled her hood over her head, shielding the orb. Kale spun on his heel with agile precision, already calculating the next impossible leap. The tide rose, the drones approached, time narrowed. "Then hold tight, Blue," Kale said, already sprinting toward the edge. "And welcome to my kind of fun." With a metallic roar, the floodgates opened, releasing an ascending maelstrom. Kyle, Ceres, and Ilan jumped together, swallowed by the magnetic current. Behind them, the consortium's drones dove like crystal sharks, chasing through the glowing columns of water. The magnetic current spat Kale, Ceres, and Ilan out onto the lowest level of the ring city, a tangle of narrow canals, suspended conduits, and rusted platforms. The air was thick with blue neon, water running upward along the walls, as if the sea had decided to play at inverted gravity. Above, lightning danced between giant turbines, cracking in shades of green and violet. Kyle landed in a crouch, sliding along the catwalk in one fluid motion, still holding Ceres by the arm. Ilan touched down with almost feline lightness, Ceres's orb humming steadily. Behind them, the consortium's drones plunged through the water columns like glass sharks, ruby eyes tracking heat and probability. "Mag's skiffs there!" Ceres pointed to 3 vehicles docked at a narrow pier, each floating inches above the water's surface. They looked like sleds of living metal, stabilizers humming in uneven rhythm. Kyle glanced, gauged the distance, and a lazy smile spread. Perfect. Time for Oath 2. He wrote on the HUD, the characters appearing in curved lines, eyes closed for 60 seconds. Ceres's eyes went wide. "Are you insane? We're being chased." Kyle closed his eyes slowly, lashes dripping. "Exactly why it works." He nodded at Ilan. "Kid, today you're my eyes." Ilan lifted his chin, a spark of pride cutting through the fear. "I see all the colors. I can guide you." "Then let's go, co-pilot." Kyle extended an arm toward Ceres. "Get in the middle. This is going to be a roller coaster." The skiff vibrated as it powered up, magnetic fields adjusting with a high-pitched hiss. Kyle released the hand stabilizers and felt the hull respond as if it were part of his own body. The HUD showed the 60-second countdown, a red circle shrinking. Behind them, drones emerged from the inverted water columns, energy blades buzzing. The first shot scorched the air, barely missing the skiff's hull. Ceres cried out something in her native tongue, clutching Elan. Kale grinned, still eyes closed. "Okay, co-pilot, colors." Elan closed his own eyes for a second, inhaled deeply, then pointed with his small finger. Green on the left, purple on the right, red behind. 2 reds very close, a blue hole straight ahead. "Blue hole," Kyle laughed. "Love blue holes. Hold tight." He leaned his body, and the skiff shot forward, diving into an arch of conduits, exhaling cold steam. The world turned into a vortex of sound. Horizontal rain, hitting like needles, the electric hum of turbines, the metallic roars of drones. "More colors," Kyle called. "Yellow above, orange twisting," Elan replied, almost in a trance. "Pink pulling downward." Kyle laughed out loud. "That's not directions, kid. That's abstract art." Ceres clenched her teeth. "I can take over." "Relax, Blue." Kyle tilted again, a perfect curve dodging a plasma blast. "He's doing great." The HUD read 37 seconds. A drone banked sideways, slicing the skiff's flank with a laser beam. The side sizzled but held. Kyle felt it through the vibration. "Red stuck on us," Elan warned. "Green very high." Kyle nudged the stabilizer with only his feet, eyes still shut. The skiff spun 180 degrees, scraping the canal wall. The drone slammed into the metal ceiling, exploding in a flash of green. 15 seconds! The HUD flashed. The monsoon intensified. Magnetized droplets ricocheted off the hull, each one a micro-lightning bolt. The canal opened into a circular abyss, a 200-meter drop to the lower docks. Kyle smelled the change in pressure. "What's ahead, co-pilot?" "Deep blue going down, silver in the center, red waiting below," Elan said, his voice trembling with adrenaline. Kyle smiled. "Perfect." At the second, the HUD showed 3 seconds left. He snapped the stabilizer. The skiff dove nose first as if plummeting, then surfed the magnetic field in a spiral, descending in a controlled fall. The drones tried to follow and smashed into one another, creating a rain of sparks and crystal shards. 0 seconds, oath complete. Kyle opened his eyes. The abyss widened before them, whirlpools of light and water spinning around. He let out a whistle. "Not bad, co-pilot. A perfect 10. Elan grinned from ear to ear, still gripping the panel. "I saw everything before it happened." Ceres took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. "That was insane." Kyle chuckled. "And we're still alive. I call that a win." The skiff shot out of the spiral tunnel into a lower dock full of scrap and containers, turbines whining as it stabilized. Behind them, the inverted water columns collapsed, temporarily blocking the drone's path. Kyle planted his feet on the metal floor and swung the skiff behind a stack of cargo. "Time to switch rides before the consortium reorganizes." Ceres held the orb closer. "And now?" Kyle's smile flickered with fresh possibilities. "Now comes the fun part. We've got to cross the outer currents to reach the mech monastery, and I already know the next oath." He snapped his fingers. "No hands." Ceres closed her eyes, almost laughing despite everything. "You're impossible." Kyle leaned toward her, conspiratorial. "And you haven't seen anything yet, Blue." High above, a flash signaled more drones descending. The sound of the inverted sea echoed like thunder. Kyle drew a deep breath, feeling that edge of life that only came at the brink of risk. "Let's move before the tide swallows us." The shelter between turbines felt like the inside of a mechanical cathedral. Cylindrical towers turned slowly, emitting a low hum that vibrated in the ribs, while ribbons of steam rose from the grated floor and disappeared into an unseen ceiling. Maintenance lights blinked in alternating rhythms, giving the space a sense of breathing. It was the perfect blind spot. Too much noise for sensors, too much movement for drones to find patterns. Kyle leaned against a hot steel pillar, eyes half closed, breathing the mix of ozone and hydraulic oil. Ceres sat a few steps away, still holding the orb as if it were a beating heart. Ilan settled between them, his face lit by the map's blue glow, tracing invisible shapes in the air with his finger. The turbine noise worked like a cocoon. For the first time since the marketplace encounter, they had a moment to breathe. Ceres watched Kale in silence, trying to decipher the man who turned chases into dances and fights into jokes. Without his permanent smile, his expression seemed different, more worn, more weighty. "You make it look easy," she said, her voice low so it wouldn't compete with the machines. "But it can't be." Kyle opened one eye, sizing her up. Then a brief smile escaped. "It's not. I just learned not to show it. These oaths," she pressed. "Why limit yourself? You could take us straight to the Tide Archive in minutes." Kyle tilted his head back against the pillar. Turbine light striped his face yellow. "Because if I don't limit myself, nothing has flavor." He rubbed his thumb over his forefinger, a nearly nervous gesture. "The first time I realized what I could do, I thought the universe would open up like a book. Instead, it became dull." Ilan looked up, curious. "Dull?" Kale turned to the boy. "When everything's easy, kid, you don't feel the butterflies, you don't feel fear, you don't feel anything, and without feeling, what's the point of living?" Ceres narrowed her eyes, catching the shadow behind his smile. "So the oaths are your spice?" Kyle gave a humorless laugh. "Exactly. My spice, my training weights, my self-imposed shackles. If I don't play with probabilities, I become a machine." The boy wrinkled his nose, trying to understand. "But you don't like being strong." Kyle stayed silent a moment. The turbines filled the space. Then, softly, "I wanted to be strong when I was a kid. I thought strength would save everyone I loved. I got too much strength and lost them all anyway." He drew a deep breath. "So now I only use enough to feel alive, not to dominate." Ceres leaned slightly forward, surprised by his honesty. "You talk like you've lived 1,000 lives." Kyle opened his eyes and looked at her. There was ancient fatigue there, but also a flash of humor. "Some days it feels that way." Silence settled, but this time it wasn't uncomfortable. Ilan rested his head on his mother's knee, his eyes still following the invisible threads in the air. Ceres held his small hand, feeling its warmth. Kyle watched, and for a moment, something inside his chest gave way. A memory of home, of places that no longer existed. He cleared his throat to shake off the knot. "Well, enough therapy session. We've got a secret archive to infiltrate and a tech cult on our tail." Ceres arched an eyebrow. "Infiltrate? I thought we were just going in." Kale smiled in his signature way. "With them, it's never just going in." He tapped the orb with his finger. "Show me the way to the mech monastery and prep the kid. He'll need his colors so we won't get detected." Ilan perked up as if fear had turned to a game. "I can see all their protection colors." Kyle winked at him. "Excellent, you're my radar, kid." Ceres hesitated. "You really trust him?" Kyle went serious, locking eyes with the boy. "More than any sensor." The turbine slowed for an instant, like a heart pausing. Ceres noticed Kale's involuntary gesture of placing his hand on the grate, almost like a silent prayer. It said more than words. Behind the sarcasm and impossible moves was someone tired, but still choosing to protect. Kale stood, shaking out his hands as if closing a book on the past. Let's go before they seal the passages. Next tide's in 6 minutes, enough time to reach the West Pier and grab a discreet route to the Mech Monastery. Ceres tucked the orb into her belt, nodding. Then let's go. Elan hopped toward the skiff's footplate, grinning. Will there be a new oath? Kyle laughed. Always. Boring's not an option. Then, turning to Ceres, but this time, no hands. I want to see if I can hack an entire fortress using only my chin. She shook her head, half laugh, half disbelief. You're impossible. Kyle winked, already heading for the narrow corridor that led to the docks. And you haven't seen anything yet, Blue? In the distance, a metallic hum began to swell, drones regrouping, algorithms adjusting. The magnetic tide vibrated harder through the walls, heralding an internal storm. It was the perfect prelude to the next act. The Mech Monastery rose like a necklace of metallic teeth on the edge of the ring city, suspended over the abyss of Aquilon. Living iron pillars intertwined with luminous arches and sculptures of automaton monks guarded the entrances. Crystal eyes blinking ancient codes. Here lay the Tide Key, a quantum core capable of opening the Tide Archive. Kyle, Ceres, and Elan huddled behind a condensation tank. In the center of the suspended plaza, surrounded by turbines and moving platforms, the temple breathed in cycles. Panels opened, closed, revealing corridors for a moment, and then erasing them, as if the very space were a living puzzle. The key is in the inner altar, Ceres whispered, projecting a map from the orb. Protected by guardians and tied cryptograms. Kyle clicked his tongue, eyes gleaming. Too good to be simple. He opened the HUD and wrote the new parameter. No hands. A beep. Oath active, Ceres frowned. You can't even open doors that way. Kyle smiled. Oh, Blue, I open doors in many ways. He turned to Elan. Kid, eyes wide open, you're my radar. That's when Tess Quint stepped from the shadows, leaning against an air duct, crooked smile in place. Still sneaking into forbidden temples, Rook, she said, adjusting her pilot jacket, red hair glowing under green light. Kyle inclined his body like greeting an old vice. Tess Quince, queen of illegal shortcuts. Without using his hands, he performed an exaggerated bow with just a twist of his torso and a knee dip. I knew you couldn't resist, she snorted. You called, I came, but no hands, seriously? Kyle winked. Gets boring if I don't complicate it. Tess shook her head, but there was a hidden smile. Just don't drag me into the grave with you. Kyle lifted his chin. Trust the process. They slipped through a maintenance corridor, Elan narrating the colors of the security system. Golden threads for cameras, green for heat sensors, red for kinetic traps. Kyle twisted his body, angling hips and shoulders, dodging like a dancer. Are you dancing or breaking in? Tess muttered behind him. Both. Kyle spun, skirting a laser beam with only a shift of his hips. Told you it was fun. Farther ahead, an automaton monk dropped from a niche, arms spreading like wings. Kyle, eyes closing for an instant, pulled a probability thread and tilted his body. The air warped around him, deflecting the Guardian's projectiles. Without hands, he pushed off with his feet, hit the wall, and rebounded like a spring. Tess cursed under her breath. That's not possible. Kyle laughed. Only impossible until someone does it. Ceres kept Elan close behind her, watching the human with a mix of disbelief and fascination. The boy grinned, calling out colors to guide Kale through invisible fields. Light blue above, ivory on the left, scarlet on the floor. Elan shouted like a conductor. Kyle spun, leapt, braced an elbow on his knee, twisted his torso. Every step seemed choreographed, with the city's breathing. Without using his hands, he activated panels with his heels, hacked locks by pressing his forehead, triggered sensors with controlled bursts of air. At the heart of the monastery, they reached the inner altar, a pedestal of liquid obsidian floating at the center of a vertical shaft. The tide key glowed suspended inside an energy field that shifted colors like the aurora borealis. "Last dance," Kyle murmured. He leapt into the void, body arching like a cat. Without hands, he used the twist of his torso to compress the energy field while pulling microcurrents of probability with subtle foot movements. The aurora wavered, opened. He caught the core between his forearm and chest, rolled mid-air, and landed on a mat of condensed vapor. "Ta-da!" he said, lifting the object with his chin resting on it, hands still behind his back. Tess's eyes went wide. "I hate you." Kyle smiled. "Mutual." A shrill alarm slashed the moment, the entire temple lit red. Automaton guardians emerged from the walls, drones buzzing along the ceiling. Kyle looked at Ceres, then Ilan. Time to improvise an exit. Ceres pulled up the orb, showing a side route. "If we go down through the tide conduit, we can reach the outer currents directly." Kyle nodded. "Excellent." He glanced at Tess. "Ready to dance out of here?" "I just wanted a simple job," she muttered, pulling out a device. Kyle grinned, the core tucked under his chin. "With me, it's never simple." Behind them, the energy field began to collapse, walls closing like teeth. The magnetic tide roared through the monastery's corridors, heralding a storm of epic proportions. Cashel drew a deep breath, feeling the weight of the next move. "All right, co-pilot, colors." Ilan smiled, eyes glowing. "All of them." Cashel's crooked grin widened. "Then let's paint this place." With one push, the four of them shot down the tide conduit, chased by a cascade of drones and guardians. The temple's roar behind them sounded like sacred thunder. The tide conduit spat them out into a translucent corridor, suspended over an ocean of electric clouds. Inverted water formed luminous columns rising from nowhere to the unseen ceiling, like pillars of living glass. Their improvised skiff skidded along a magnetic rail and finally stopped on a circular platform ringed with blue metal sculptures. It was supposed to be a discreet side route, but Morsk was already waiting. In the center of the platform floated an anchor throne, just inches above the floor, made of pulsing cables and holographic plates. Upon it sat Arch-Augur Morsk, half flesh, half prism of data, perfectly still. His face was a mask without features, only a liquid veil of shifting symbols. Lines of probability radiated from him like tentacles of light, crossing the space to the pillars and back again, weaving a vibrating net. Ceres held her breath. "He knows we have the key." Kale stopped, still holding the core with his chin. "Of course he does. That's the fun part." The HUD flickered, detecting hundreds of camouflaged micro-drones, each one an eye of the Oracle. Morsk raised a holographic hand. His voice came in multiple layers at once, deep, high, metallic, human, all combined. "Kyle Rook, weaver of probabilities. I have seen thousands of futures, and all end with your ruin." Kyle chuckled softly. "Thousands? I bet some end with you getting punched too." The augur tilted his head, the symbols on his mask accelerating. "I see your death, your loneliness, your impotence. You are an equation repeating itself into exhaustion." Each word seemed heavier, the corridor lights pulsing in sync with his phrases. "In the end, you save no one. In the end, you lose." Kyle felt the weight of the threads tightening around him. It was as if the probability net was closing in, every line vibrating with cruel certainties. The memory of the emptiness he'd confessed to Ceres in the turbine shelter surfaced, trying to root itself. Ceres stepped forward, worried. "Kyle?" He closed his eyes, drew a deep breath. "I'm fine." but his voice came out tense. Ilan, at his mother's side, watched with wide eyes. For him, the probability lines weren't abstract. They were colors, sound patterns. And he sensed something Kale couldn't, a hidden melody, a repetitive pattern, a dominant note Morsk was using to compress possible realities. Without waiting for instruction, Ilan inhaled and began to sing. It was a strange sound, a series of almost imperceptible notes, half whistle, half vibration. It wasn't any known song, pure instinct, an attempt to rip the colors he saw. The lines flickered, symbols on Morsk's mask blinked out of sync. Kale felt immediate relief, like the weight had been cut. He opened his eyes, a smile returning. "Good kid, keep going." Ilan shifted the pitch, changing each note's frequency. Each tone opened tiny cracks in the fabric of predictions. The tentacle-like lines began to scramble, the forecasted futures collapsing. Morsk recoiled, his voice losing layers. "What are you doing?" Kyle tilted his head. "Breaking your toy." Without his hands, he spun his body, channeling a wave of micro-possibilities that burst outward like shards of compressed air. The light webs snapped one by one, cords breaking under tension. Ceres gripped the orb and launched a sequence of codes inherited from her regency throne. Panels on the platform opened, revealing hidden passages. Morsk tried to reassert control, but Ilan increased his tone, now singing in glissando, the notes sliding between frequencies. The drones lost cohesion, falling like molten glass. Kyle, free of the nets, spun impossibly and tapped his heel to the floor. Just a small touch, but enough to trigger a cascading collapse of probabilities. The entire platform shuddered. "Goodbye, Augur." He grinned, the core wedged under his chin. "I've never liked spoilers." With one last crack of dissonant notes, Ilan severed Morsk's connection to local reality. The Arch-Augur dissolved in a flash, leaving only a flickering shadow that unraveled like digital smoke. The corridor fell silent, except for the distant hum of turbines and the soft echo of Ilan's fading song. Kyle opened one eye, took a deep breath, and let out a short laugh. "Kid, you're officially the best co-pilot in the galaxy." Ilan looked at him, not understanding the scale of what he'd done. "I just sang the wrong colors." Ceres squeezed her son's shoulder with pride and trembling. "You saved us all." Kyle straightened, the HUD flashing oath complete. Time to bolt before he reboots the software. They ran down the side corridor. Ceres's orb had opened, descending to the lower levels. Behind them, the space where Morsk had been crackled with blue lightning, a harbinger of an even more dangerous return. Kyle glanced at Ceres as they ran. "This just got personal." Ceres nodded, clutching the orb. "He knows you're the one variable he can't predict." Kyle smiled, darkly amused. "Good. I love being a statistical error." Ahead, an oval skylight revealed the inverted ocean, lit by a glow pulsing from the depths. The tide archive lay on the other side of that abyss, but now the path was swarming with patrols and magnetic waves. Kyle drew a deep breath. "Then it's time for the next oath, but this time, it's personal." The narrow corridor opened into a colossal atrium of organic glass. Beyond it, the inverted ocean seemed to form a liquid curtain pulsing with deep colors. At the center of that curtain was a circular slit, like an eye open in the sea. Ceres raised the orb, and a blue beam shot forward, touching the void. The water pulled back, forming a translucent tunnel leading to the heart of the tide archive. Kyle, Ceres, Ilan, and Tess moved through the tunnel, feeling the pressure fluctuate, the sounds muffled by the weight of liquid around them. Ilan kept his eyes wide, absorbing every passing color. The tunnel opened into a chamber so vast it seemed to have no ceiling or floor, only suspended water columns lit by floating runes. It was a liquid library, Each column held fragments of roots, tides, destinies and memories spanning centuries. Ceres drew a deep breath. "We're here. The archive." Kyle whistled. "Not bad. Looks like an ocean's brain." He twisted his torso, attuned to the energy flows. Ceres walked to the center where a liquid altar rose and fell in slow intervals. She set the orb on its surface, which absorbed the sphere and projected thousands of luminous lines into the air. Maps of interstellar routes, gravitational currents, migration patterns, economic flows, a symphony of data. "The Techno-Oracle Consortium always claimed to predict the tides," Ceres said, her voice echoing across the chamber. "But here is the proof they manufacture them. They manipulate routes and gravitational currents to dictate destinies, economies, wars, entire exoduses." She pointed to a sequence of red lines diverting planets from their trade routes, isolating whole systems. "This isn't prophecy, it's engineering destiny." Elan gazed in fascination at the flows, touching them with his fingertips, making them shimmer. "Mom, they're like music strings." Kyle leaned over the altar without using his hands. "So this is what they call an oracle, a bunch of strings they pull themselves." He looked at Ceres. "Now that we have proof, what's the plan?" Ceres hesitated, her blue-lit face reflecting the maps. "Before, I only wanted to escape. But if we show this to the people, entire systems will rebel. We could topple the consortium." Tess let out a short laugh. "Or we could be dead before we blink. They'll hunt us in every port." Kyle swayed his body side to side, thinking. "I've always found just running boring." He turned to Elan. "And you, kid, think it's worth showing?" The boy didn't hesitate. "If it's a lie, the sea turns gray. If it's true, it's deep blue. It's deep blue now." Kyle smiled. "Deep blue it is. Decided." He lifted his chin. "Instead of hiding, we expose." Ceres straightened her shoulders. "Then we'll transmit everything. Now." Kyle tilted his torso and triggered a tide console with his foot. Runes emerged, projecting communication channels to every system connected to the consortium's network. A wave of data began to form, ready to surge like a tide of information. Tess clenched her teeth. "You're all insane, but I admit it's a beautiful show." Kyle laughed. "You haven't seen anything yet." Suddenly the water columns shuddered, the liquid ceiling glowed with red runes. Metallic voices echoed, "Authorization revoked, intruders detected, contain and neutralize." Kyle narrowed his eyes, feeling the shift in probabilities. "Of course, they have a contingency protocol." He turned to Ceres. "The tide will break in less than a minute." Ceres began adjusting the codes on the liquid altar, her voice steady despite the chaos. "I just need 30 more seconds to release the data." Kyle drew a deep breath. "Then we hold the wave." He looked to Elan. "Kid, ready for another duet?" The boy nodded. "Ready." Kyle grinned at Tess. "You'll want to record this." "It'll be legend." The water columns began closing in like tentacles trying to crush them. Kyle flexed his body, micro gestures of shoulders and feet pulling possibilities. Elan sang, modulating the colors to open temporary slits. Ceres keyed rapid patterns into the liquid altar. When the timer hit the final seconds, a blue flash raced across the chamber. The transmission had been sent. The consortium's runes flickered in failure, their secret codes exposed to the entire galactic system. Ceres lifted her eyes from the altar. "It's done. The people know." Kyle smiled wide even as the columns collapsed around them. "Now it's getting interesting." A roar rolled through the archive as the entire chamber began to disintegrate, inverted water falling like reverse rain. Kyle yanked Ceres and Elan back. Tess was already triggering an alternate path with her device. "Let's move before this place decides to drown us upside down," Kyle said, still smiling. They ran for the exit as the sea of data split apart, lights and memories dissolving around them. The echo of the transmission spread across space like a giant tide, carrying the consortium's secret to every corner. Kyle glanced over his shoulder at Ceres. "No going back now, Blue." She nodded, clutching the orb. "I don't want to." Behind them, the liquid heart of the archive imploded into a glowing vortex. Ahead, a narrow corridor led to the outside of the ring city, and beyond it a furious consortium fleet. Kyle drew a deep breath, his eyes glinting with anticipation for the next oath. Time to get out in style. When they emerged through the Tide Archive's escape corridor, the view stole their breath. The glass fleet awaited, suspended over the inverted ocean like a swarm of murderous jewels. Faceted crystal cruisers, transparent as diamonds, reflected the blue light of the water columns. Each ship was both elegant and lethal, energy weapons primed to fire. Ceres pressed the orb to her chest. They came with everything. Kyle let out a low whistle. Beautiful, almost ashamed to break. He opened the HUD and wrote the new parameter. Left hand only and bad rhymes. A beep. Oath active. Tess's eyes went wide. "You've got to be kidding." Kyle smiled. "If it's not fun, it's not worth it." Ilan stared, fascinated by the colors. Each cruiser was a symphony of lights and patterns, overlapping fields of probability. "It's like a forest of crystals." Kyle stretched out his left hand, fingers trembling lightly. "Forest of crystal. Rhymes so banal. Let's dance among mortals. Watch the empire fall." Tess groaned. "Seriously?" Ceres raised the orb, activating a public channel. "The transmission is still live. Every connected system is watching." Her voice echoed firm. "Citizens of the galaxy, see the fleet that strangles your roots, see the face of the consortium." While Ceres spoke, Kale piloted the small craft through open space, only his left hand on the controls, right arm behind his back. He tossed out improvised verses, crossing the crystals, no rivals in sight, sending my signals, tearing their might. Each silly rhyme matched a precise move, flipping a beam, pulling a possibility, breaking a shield. The cruisers fired energy beams that looked like solid lances of light. Kyle leaned his torso, using his left forearm and micro-gestures of his feet to deflect. Each shot ricocheted at impossible angles, striking the enemy's own sensors and engines. "Shards of glass, destiny bent, twisting the path, breaking intent," he chanted, almost laughing. Ilan clapped, modulating his singing in harmony, scrambling the consortium's targeting algorithms. Tess could only grip her seat, eyes wide. Ceres, still broadcasting, showed in real time how the cruisers reacted. "Look, the consortium no longer foresees, it fears." Her voice grew stronger, fed by Kyle's courage and the gaze of millions watching. Kyle dove the vehicle between two faceted cruisers, skimming their transparent hulls. Without weapons of his own, he used micro-possibilities to braid enemy fire trajectories, forcing them to hit each other. Crystal cracked in deadly, beautiful patterns. Left hand steers, right hand's at rest. The sea throws its challenge, my rhyme's the test. A massive cruiser turned its main cannon toward them. Kyle blinked, feeling the pressure rise. The HUD showed only seconds before the shot. He tilted his body, whispering, "Giant crystal, spicy thrill, constant bad luck," and pulled a probability thread so fine it felt like a shiver. The cannon jammed and fired into its own hull, exploding in blue light. Ceres cut the transmission for a second to look at Kale, astonished. "That's impossible." Kale smiled without looking back. It was. Now it's just Tuesday. The cruisers began to lose formation. Ceres returned to the channel, her voice ringing. "The consortium manipulates you, but it does not control all futures. You can choose. Her image beamed across every screen in every connected system, while behind her, Kyle turned the fleet into calculated chaos. A bad rhyme, shared time, crystal breaks, future shakes. Kyle sang almost under his breath, each verse a choreography in space. Ilan modulated frequencies to distort the radars, his high voice creating colorful waves that disabled quantum locks. Tess shook her head, caught between horror and awe. This is madness, absolute. Kyle winked at her. It's art, Tess. Improvised art. One last cruiser blocked the path to the escape route. Kyle looked at Ilan. Color? White-violet. Weak in the middle? Kyle smiled. A crystal shatters, another is born, left hand points, and the way is torn. He twisted his torso and, with a single touch of his left pinky on the panel, made the cruiser slip in its own gravity, opening a perfect corridor. Behind them, the entire fleet floated in pieces, not fully destroyed but neutralized. Engines frozen, sensors blind, communications scrambled. Kyle exhaled, HUD flashing, oath complete. Not bad for one hand. Ceres shut down the transmission, the orb pulsing one last time. The message is out. The consortium can't deny it now. Kyle turned to her, still smiling. Then let's go before they reach for the real weapons. Tess wiped a hand over her face. As if this wasn't already. Kyle winked at Ilan. Ready for the next challenge? Co-pilot. The boy nodded, eyes glowing. Always. Ahead, a crack in the crystalline field revealed the exit to the outer currents. The trio, now a quartet, prepared to cross. Behind them, red lights flickered again, in what remained of the fleet, a sign that Morsk hadn't given up. Kyle drew a deep breath. Okay, Blue. We're in the final stretch. The consortium will throw everything now. Ceres squeezed the orb. Then so will we. The improvised skiff slipped through the gap open between the crystal cruisers. Ahead, the inverted sea formed a wide corridor filled with slowly turning gravity towers, like submerged colossi. At its center, suspended over a dark blue vortex, rose the Oracle's knot, a semi-organic structure resembling a giant shell of living glass, where the Techno-Oracle Consortium centralized its control over tides and predictions. Ceres pressed the orb to her chest. This is where Morsk manipulates everything. Kyle stared at the shell, a serious glint in his eyes. Then this is where it ends, but without a bloodbath. He tilted his torso, preparing micro-movements. The HUD flickered. He didn't write an oath this time. The promise was in his heart. Ilan, seated between Kyle and Ceres, stared at the orb as though seeing something the others couldn't. Mom, the orb is calling me. Ceres hesitated. Calling? The boy lifted his hands. The orb floated on its own, pulsing deep blue. Kyle saw probability threads knotting around the boy, as if the inverted ocean had chosen a new conductor. He can sync with it, Kyle murmured. It's like the tides are responding to his frequency. Ilan closed his eyes. Soft notes spilled from his lips, not like before, but a layered chant. With each syllable, the inverted sea around them bent, currents opening in petals. The orb projected thousands of holographic lines connecting to the shell of the Oracle's knot. Morsk appeared as a hologram before them, mask of symbols trembling. Insolent child, you don't know what you're dealing with. Kyle kept his eyes on him. And you don't understand what choice means. As Ilan sang, Kyle felt the probabilities shift. The entire fleet, crystal cruisers, gravity towers, drones, was tied to the Oracle's knot like tides to a moon. One wrong pull and everything would collapse. He drew a deep breath, micro movements of feet and shoulders aligning variables. Instead of destroying, he began to unthread, tiny adjustments to gravitational flow, an inverted tide here, a microscopic delay there, a gentle but persistent pull. In space, the cruisers began drifting in erratic directions, energy fields forcing them to power down weapons and engines to avoid collision. Gravity towers slowed, destabilizing sensors. Drones powered off into safe mode to prevent overload. No crew was harmed, only neutralized. Ceres watched, eyes wide. "You're calming their tide." Kyle gave a half smile. "Honor's not just a pretty word. If they survive, maybe they'll choose differently after." Morsk's voice grated through the hologram, its layers unraveling. "No, this is not future! This is chaos!" Kyle tilted his body, finishing the pull. "No, this is freedom!" The orb shone brighter. Elan opened his eyes, now two blue suns, and modulated a final note. All the lines snapped at once like the strings of a harp cut loose. The shell of the oracle's knot trembled, inner lights going dark, fragmented predictions dissolving into nothing. Across every system, the public image of the consortium now showed not its power, but its collapse. Contradictory projections, incoherent orders, a fleet incapable of acting. The myth of infallibility broke before millions of witnesses. Ceres squeezed her son's shoulder, blue tears in her eyes. "You did it!" Elan just breathed, as if he'd swum for miles. The colors went calm. Kyle looked at Morsk's hologram, now flickering, reduced to a fragile human voice. "It's over, Olga. No more false tides, no more imposed destiny." Morsk recoiled, symbols fading. "You don't understand. Without us, there will be chaos." Kyle smiled, but there was no triumph in it, only a strange compassion. "Maybe it's time to let people learn to swim without you." The hologram crackled and vanished. The shell of the oracle's knot collapsed slowly, like molten glass. The entire fleet dispersed, each cruiser seeking an escape route or drifting into safe mode. Tess let out a whistle. "I've never seen anything like that." Kyle took a deep breath, the HUD flashing "process complete." "Neither have I. And I've seen a lot." Ceres raised the orb, now lighter, pulsing with a serene tone. "The tide is free." Kyle looked at Elan. "Good work, co-pilot. You just reset the galaxy." The boy smiled shyly. "I just sang differently." The inverted ocean around them began to normalize, water columns losing their glow, turbulence subsiding. A corridor opened toward the exit, leading to a tranquil horizon. Kyle felt something new in his chest, not the thrill of risk, but a fresh calm. "Well, Blue, looks like the party's over." Ceres looked at him, a slow smile emerging. "No, I think it's just begun." Behind them, the echo of the consortium's collapse reverberated across the galaxy. Ahead, a new path opened, not traced by forecasts or manipulations. Kale drew a deep breath, knowing the next oath wouldn't be about combat, but about staying. The inverted water corridor carried them to a suspended terrace, now calm after the collapse of the oracle's knot. The once turbulent tide had become a translucent mantle reflecting the stars. Ships once hostile hovered at a distance, weapons offline, crews uncertain. On public screens, Ceres and Elan's transmission still echoed, replayed on millions of devices. The entire galaxy was watching. Kyle stepped off the skiff in a slow, almost reverent movement. There were no more enemies, only eyes, some curious, others reverent, all waiting. His HUD flickered, calculating probabilities for future paths, but this time he pulled no threads. Ceres placed the orb at the terrace's center. A collective projection appeared. Local leaders, representatives of affected worlds, ex-consortium officers, refugees. The improvised network had become a spontaneous assembly of the entire galaxy. "They want you to speak," Ceres whispered. Kyle looked at her, then at Elan, then at the crowd of holograms. "I can speak. I won't command." He took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment. He stepped up to the orb. His voice came out clear, amplified by the water columns and quantum channels. "I'm no king, no prophet, no savior." He looked around, left hand resting on his hip, right still behind his back. A subconscious gesture. "I was just a bored guy who decided to break a rigged game. The power that toppled the consortium isn't mine. It's yours. It always was." Murmurs rippled through the holographic assembly. Some expected him to take command, others to announce a new order. Kyle lifted his chin. "If you want a different future, build it together. Form assemblies, vote, debate. No one should choose for you, not me, not any oracle." Ceres watched in silence, eyes shining. Elan held her hand. Tess, leaning against a pillar, shook her head with a smile, as if witnessing something rare. Kale stepped back, opening space for Ceres. "I know someone who can help with the transition. She doesn't manipulate tides. She sailed through them. She paid the price of exile and risk to bring you the truth." Ceres swallowed. "Kyle, He raised his left hand, interrupting gently. "It's not about being perfect. It's about being a bridge until the people organize." But the orb projected data from the Tide archive, confirming Ceres's legitimacy. Former allies and scattered communities hailed her name. The holographic assembly voted in real time, and the decision appeared as an aurora above the terrace. Ceres reinstated as transitional regent. Ceres looked at Kyle, surprised and moved. "You could have taken it all." Kyle smiled, this time without irony. "Power's just another kind of prison. I'd rather stay free." The inverted sea around them seemed to understand. Soft currents, dim lights, an uncanny calm for such a place. Elan squeezed his mother's hand, eyes shining. Kyle turned to him. "Take care of these people, kid. Teach colors, teach choice." The boy nodded. "And you?" Kyle looked toward the liquid horizon. "I'll find another corner of the universe to explore. I don't need oaths anymore to feel alive." He grinned. "But I won't stop getting into trouble." Ceres stepped forward. "Then this isn't a final goodbye." Kyle tilted his body in his signature gesture. "Never is, just another beginning." Behind them, the assembly dissolved into beams of light. Ahead, a neutral ship waited to take him away from the ring city. Tess was already inside, fiddling with controls. Kyle walked up to the boarding ramp, paused, and looked back one last time. Ceres held the orb, Elan by her side, holographic leaders all around. A new world was beginning there. No oracles, no imposed destinies. Kale drew a deep breath, feeling a rare peace. "Well, Blue, that was one hell of a challenge." Ceres smiled. "And it's not over yet." He winked at her, climbed the ramp, and disappeared into the ship. The engine roared, slicing the tide like a blade of light. The inverted sea closed behind him, leaving Ceres and Elan at the center of the terrace, a mother and son facing the future, conducting a new tide. Tess's neutral ship hovered over the bay as Kale paused at the top of the gangway. The inverted sea was calm for the first time since he'd arrived at the ring city. Water columns reflected the sky in gold and blue. The crystal cruisers, now neutral, formed a distant arch like silent sentinels. Ceres and Elan stood on the terrace, surrounded by local representatives, technicians, and former enemies now offering support for reconstruction. A swelling crowd filled the walkways and neighboring platforms, forming a mosaic of colors and improvised flags. It was a moment suspended in time. Kyle drew a deep breath. Until that instant, every decision he'd made had been an escape disguised as adventure. Each oath, a way to dodge the void. But looking at those faces, he realized something had changed. The true challenge wasn't toppling empires, it was staying. He turned on his heels and walked back to the center of the terrace. The noise ebbed as people noticed. Ceres raised her eyebrows, surprised. Elan smiled, as if he already knew. Kyle stopped beside them. "You know, Blue." His voice was low but charged with resolve. "Maybe it's time for a different oath." Ceres tilted her head. "Which one?" Kyle opened the HUD one last time. In the air, the letters formed slowly. Oath number 5. Stay 1 year without running. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Elan looked up at him, eyes glinting. "That's the hardest one." Kale laughed, lightly ruffling the boy's hair. "It's the only one that matters." Ceres let out an unexpected smile, part relief, part disbelief. "So you're finally going to stop sabotaging yourself?" Kyle winked at her. "I'll try. I'm not promising to stay quiet, just to stay." Ceres's orb, still synced to the network, projected the oath in real time to the entire city. A second later, applause and shouts echoed across the walkways, rising until they became a collective roar. All around the ring, people clapped, stomped their feet, vibrated with that simple decision. The man who had toppled the consortium had chosen to stay. Elan laughed, hugging Kale's arm. "Bet you won't last 3 months." Kale tilted his body theatrically. "Then help me last." Ceres placed her hand over his, firm and calm. "A year is just the beginning." Kyle looked out at the liquid horizon, where the binary sun reflected like 2 coins falling slowly into a lake. For the first time, he felt he could stop running without losing who he was. The HUD went dark. No plan, no new challenge. Just the sound of the sea and the crowd celebrating. Kyle drew a long breath, taking in the moment, and murmured to himself, "This will be the hardest oath of all." Beside him, Elan laughed. In front of him, Ceres smiled. Around them, the ring city applauded, and for the first time in a long while, Kale let the echo of that applause enter his chest, filling the void that had once been occupied only by challenges.